Okay, my name's Ken Dooley. I'm a researcher at Aalto University in Helsinki, and I also work for Granlund Consulting Engineers in Helsinki. Today I'm going to talk about building usage data, so utilization data or occupancy data, and about energy consumption data, and how these two streams of information can be quite useful, especially useful to us as researchers. So today I'm interested in talking about why this data is important, the different ways to collect this data, and to discuss our Helsinki case, which we have collected with Cognimatics and some Axis cameras. So overall, occupancy data is valuable to kind of building owners and real estate people. We want to optimize the amount of space we use. So in an office building, this means how many desks do I need? If I have 100 people, do I need 100 desks? So if we optimize our space, then it reduces rent, it reduces energy consumption, because if you have smaller space, if you say I have 4 floors today, but actually I only need 3, then reducing that floor, taking it away, reduces your rent, and you're also not paying the heating and electricity lighting for that extra floor. So reducing space saves rent and saves energy. It also helps optimize our scheduling, our building management system scheduling. So this says all the big systems like ventilation or heating or lighting, all these things that are turned on when the building opens and turned off when the building closes, can I optimize when the building should open and close based on usage? Another thing then is looking at smaller devices, like coffee machines or photocopiers or laptops or lights on each desk. Can we understand when to turn these things off automatically using usage data? So one thing we talk about, and one thing that's becoming very popular at the moment, is this idea of reducing the number of desks per person in workplaces. Historically, we've had this idea of 1 desk per person, maybe in a kind of cubicle type of style office, like we show this kind of grey picture here. And the idea is that if we have good space efficiency data or utilization data, then we replace the grey old office building of the past with something much more well designed. So we have these kind of colorful, spend more money on the furniture because we're paying less rent and we have less space. So the furniture that we do have, we value more and we spend more money on it as building providers. So you have colorful sofas for kind of having coffee or for working in an informal setting, and kind of team working spaces. And the idea is that if the building owners take away space and it isn't 1 desk per person, then they must give something back. And what they give back to the building users or the employees is they allow them to work at home a few days a week or work from coffee shops, and then the office building itself should be a nicer place to come. In one case in Helsinki, we've seen that 66% of people said their productivity was higher in this new way of working, some at home, some in coffee shops, and some in the office. So usage data then is quite important on sizing how much is the practical space a company needs. Another example that we have, which is a problem, is kind of comparing energy consumption of different people. A typical problem here is where a city is trying to encourage the people who live in the city to reduce energy consumption. We have an example shown here where we have a 2-bedroom apartment with a single person living on their own and maybe a family. Now, traditionally, if we said, okay, please try and reduce your energy consumption, let's have a competition to see who uses the least energy, then in fact, the person living on their own in their apartment just uses less energy because it's only 1 person, and it's not having 4 showers or having, TV and cooking and everything for 4 different people. Essentially, the person living on their own wins the energy saving competition. When we just say which apartment uses the least and we compare similar sized apartments, then essentially if there's one apartment with a lot less people, they win. We want usage data to benchmark and to encourage fair benchmarking of energy consumption. And at the moment, we can't do that today without good usage data. We have the same problem in office buildings. This was a kind of fun presentation we gave recently in the university, where we had kids playing with Lego, and we had one kid with a kind of empty space and another with a full space. And the idea here is very similar to the residential case. At the moment, we use kilowatt hours per meter squared to measure energy efficiency in buildings. This means that it's kilowatt hours, so the amount of energy consumption, divided by the area of the building. Now, this means that we, as kind of researchers who are encouraging low energy consumption and low carbon consumption and sustainability in the built environment, we actually like efficient spaces. So we like co-working spaces where there's lots of people sharing desks. We like less these kind of big offices which are kind of empty and everyone has their own desk. At the moment, as I showed in the residential case, when we compare energy efficiency in the way that we do, we're rewarding empty spaces. The empty spaces use the least amount of energy, and therefore they look like they're the most energy efficient, but they're not. So we're questioning all the time the way we do energy efficiency legally today. Every country kind of uses the same kind of method, and we want to benchmark this in a fairer way so that those people who are using the built environment better, who are being more efficient with their space, they're not punished. So why is this important? So then one thing that we're seeing a lot in Finland, this slide isn't finished, but the important thing is the red box that says 40% and the box above it that says 8%. Sitra are a really important innovation fund in Finland. The things that they say and they talk about are very well respected in Finland. And what the 40% says is that the office utilization rate is about 40%. And what it says above it is the car utilization rate is about 8%. And why this is important is that these are things that are seen as being really wasteful, that we should use our spaces more. So it's a discussion about resource efficiency and circular economy. And these are things that should be improved upon over time. Another thing that isn't just about saving money is that actually buildings which are underutilized can actually create or generate more money from this understanding. So we're now seeing things like Airbnb, where homeowners are renting out their spaces and they're making money by renting out spaces. We're now seeing this happen in commercial buildings too. So we're seeing these kind of Airbnb of commercial spaces such as Flexstila or Venu or Splacer or Venutastic or EventUp, where basically you as a company can rent out your boardrooms or your spaces at night time or in the evening times or weekend times. And if you understand that your building is used quite less or not so much, you can then rent it out much easier than before with these kind of Airbnb type of services. Another example that we talk about in the university is this idea of city on demand. This is again is another trend of how cities are changing. We see the boxes here, the previous size of kind of a hospital and a university and a workplace. And now we're seeing that these typical kind of office spaces or workspaces or city spaces, they're getting smaller because they're sharing spaces in between. If I don't work in my office all the time, if I work one day a week in a library or a coffee shop or from home, then there are these kind of service platforms that I'm using during the week, and therefore my office can be smaller. So our office in Helsinki, we do a lot of working from home, but also we rent some desks in a co-working space in the center of Helsinki. So if you have a meeting in the morning and at 3 p.m. you're just about to go home, but you want to do a few hours work, you don't have to come back to the office. You can work in this kind of desks that we've rented in an office building downtown. We also see this in offices where if we have a 300-person office here in Helsinki and we meet together all 300 a couple of times a year, we don't have a space in our office building to keep everyone, so we rent a cinema or an auditorium. We don't have to have that auditorium in our building. We can rent it. So all the time we're seeing universities, we can rent spaces there, or they rent space in the middle of the city. Maybe even hospitals are doing this as well, having kind of pop-up clinics or something. And all the time we're seeing the previous traditional buildings being reduced in size, and shared spaces happening all over the city, and this is again making our space and our city more efficient. There's also a new European standard that's come out a couple of years ago called EN 15643-1, and the idea of this is to say that if we're going to say buildings are good or buildings are bad from a sustainability point of view, then it's quite important that we specify the type of building and that we specify the patterns of use, so the type of occupancy. And in our projects, we're really interested in usage data because we want to divide the traditional energy efficiency metric called kilowatt hours per meter squared. We want to divide that by total person hours per year for the building. And we think if we can understand how much the building is used per year, then this is the true measure of kind of energy efficiency that doesn't punish people that use their space a lot. So as I've shown, if your space is really full, then your energy efficiency score is bad. So actually they're being punished, where we want to promote people to fill their spaces quite efficiently. So something we've done in some simulations in Helsinki in the past was we look at 12 meters squared per person. So 12 meters squared per person is a lot of space per person compared to something like 10 or 8. So case D here has lots of people in it relative to case 12. And if we look at the energy efficiency kilowatt hours per meter squared, then the most empty example is A, and as we get more full and we use it for more hours per day, their energy efficiency score gets worse. So this idea of having more people in case D, their energy efficiency score is all the time getting worse and they're being punished. They're considered a non-efficient building with regards to energy, but we think they are. So if we divide by total person hours per year, then we see that having less people in the building gets you 26 more, so it's a worse score. And again we see that the building types that are less full get a worse score. And this is where we want to go from a legal standpoint of measuring energy efficiency, and usage data and occupancy data becomes very important to that. So let's have a look then at some data collection methods. So one key kind of overview of this then is that it's always a balance sometimes between the accuracy of the data. Are we counting everyone in the building or just some people in the building? The cost of the data, is it something very inexpensive, or is the installation and license fee every year expensive? And then this idea of privacy, are we following people around the building, or are we just collecting this data kind of anonymously? One of these kind of inexpensive and anonymous but low accurate ways is using iBeacons. These are kind of geopositional devices, a bit like GPS, but they're installed in buildings. And as your phone walks around the building, if you have a location app, such as a kind of indoor mapping app or something like that, then your phone pings and talks to these devices. And as you ping and as you connect to them, a bit like cell phone towers inside a building, if you have an app, as your phone pings to them, then they can count how many people walk by. The problem with these is that you really do need to have the app installed on your phone, and not a lot of people will do that. Sometimes they're used in retail to use the store's app, so you can see some mapping and they will automatically send to you some vouchers or some discounts for that day, and it's a way for a building to talk to smartphones and for retail to kind of communicate with smartphones. And as a consequence of this, they can count the different users and where they go around the shop. But at the moment, these aren't very practical because the consumers still aren't installing the apps on their phones. Another example then is kind of connecting to Wi-Fi. In an office building, for example, this could count how many users were on the system. It's a really good way of counting LAN and Wi-Fi connections to just get a feeling of when the building is empty, when the building is full. This can also be used in retail if people connect to the Wi-Fi systems, and as they walk around the building and connect to each separate router along the building, it can also follow and count the users. But again, they have to connect to the Wi-Fi. Access control, then people can use ID cards to enter a building. This can help collect this kind of data, can help see how many people are in the building. The only problem with this is that if I come back for lunch and I open the door and all my colleagues walk through, then it only counts me. It doesn't count every single person, so it's not very accurate. Cameras then we've used in our cases and we find them very accurate, and there's less of a privacy issue because they're pointing straight down. So this is something that is a little bit more expensive than the Wi-Fi or iBeacons, for example, but we see it as being accurate. And then other alternative methods then are using kind of calendar bookings for rooms, for example, using facial recognition cameras, using real-time location systems, which are a bit like beacons, but they're location tags that people put on things in a building that they don't want to lose, so kind of like asset tracking. Can also be used for maybe people if it was used for ID tags. You can use clock-in systems. These are like sometimes are used. They're a little bit old-fashioned now, but where people check in every time they arrive in the building. And then something really interesting that's kind of emerging is things like fitness trackers or wearables or sports apps. We're seeing these used more and more in buildings now at the moment. In one case, some sports apps, if you wear them, you can get cheaper health insurance by showing you walk a certain number of steps per day. And we've seen more and more reasons why these kind of fitness trackers are being used in buildings. So this is an interesting data stream with regards to utilization. So then our Helsinki case, some results from there. It was a floor in a building with 66 people. It was an office building in Helsinki, and the operating hours were 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night. I installed the cameras personally, and we got some very interesting results. So this is a typical day. We can see that the peak number of people is about 44. People really start to come in around 6:30, 7 a.m. and then a lot of people come in that first hour or two. People go for lunch around 11 a.m. and then slowly over the course of the day, from maybe around 3:30 onwards, people start to leave the building. We see that really the core hours are between maybe 8 a.m. and maybe 16:30, so 4:30 p.m. These are really the hours when most people are there. We had one really funny result in the couple of months when we were doing the study. We thought we had a problem with the cameras when the peak on average was about 44 people, and one day we got over 90 people on the floor. We looked at the cameras and there was no problem, and actually what it turned out was somebody had been offering free cake for their birthday, and they emailed everyone in the whole building, and everyone came to the floor to get some birthday cake. So after really a lot of analysis and seeing what the hell was wrong with our data, we found out nothing was wrong, and it was what we're calling the cake effect. So here then is an example of, during the study period, the average Monday, the average Tuesday, the average Wednesday, the average Thursday, and the average Friday. And we were quite surprised to see that they were so similar. There was nothing like that, okay, you can see people leave a little bit earlier on a Friday, maybe there's less people in on a Friday. People seem to work a bit later on Wednesday, but we couldn't see any real difference between the days, which we were surprised about. We actually thought it might have been the opposite. We might have thought people left earlier on Monday and worked later on Friday because of deadlines or something like this, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So we were surprised all the days were so similar. And again, this kind of peak is between the previous hours that we mentioned, between 8 and about 4:30. So then when we look at kind of space efficiency of checking how many desks there was, we could see that of the 66 people on the floor, there were 54 desks provided, and actually they could get away with having 10 less desks. So they previously had 18% space, 18% less space than they needed, and we were saying that they could actually get away with reducing 15% more. The company in question said that they were kind of aware of this, and they were keeping some space for hiring new employees in the coming year. But they were surprised it was as many as they didn't need 10. They thought it was just a few desks. We look at scheduling and controlling the energy equipment. So one big learning from this was in the office building, there was a lot of energy used at night time and in early morning time when the building was essentially empty. What we learned was if we look at the electricity, there's a lot, the lighting is pretty good. It seems to go off at midnight. But generally there's a lot of ventilation and cooling and small power, meaning things like things plugged into the wall, so like laptops and coffee machines and photocopiers. There was a lot of energy from these during the nighttime and during the early morning. So we noticed that, for example, for 27% of the energy consumption was consumed basically between 9 p.m. all the way through the night and then through the next morning at 7 a.m., for example. When the building was totally empty, 27% of the energy was consumed, which is very, very high. We would expect this to be a lot less than 10%. We then saw as well that as much as kind of over than a third of the energy was consumed at a time when less than or about 1% of the occupancy rate of the building. So really very little people in the building, more or less 0 people in the building, just about 1, and the energy consumption during those hours was 1/3. So this is not acceptable and will be improved by the people in the building. But again, having this data, which we didn't have access to before, it's very interesting. So one thing we've done just to really show is that if we were to use the cameras to automatically control the building and to turn off the lights and ventilation and heating when we knew everyone had gone home, then we could actually reduce the energy consumption by about 15%. The electricity could be reduced by 11% and heating by 20%. And again, if we use some kind of smart control, so as people started leaving the building, we turned down the ventilation and started to just slowly turn things off as people started leaving, then the total energy consumption could be about 18%. So that's quite impressive, this idea of controlling with this kind of data. We also, just to get a feeling of what kind of energy could be saved by reducing the desks, we also looked at actually how much energy were they saving by taking space away. So the main case here is if they had 1 desk for each person, so 66 desks, we see the energy consumption there. And then if they reduce the desks by 54, down to 54, so by 18%, we see there's actually a huge amount of energy saving. There's almost 31% of energy saving, which is really impressive. And this is just from removing desks. And then we saw then that in total, an extra 14% could be saved by reducing 10 more desks. So quite impressive savings just on removing desks and saving space. So if we were to summarize then, the whole idea of having occupancy data, which buildings don't really have today, if we can somehow accurately measure this data, then we aim to optimize space use, and the idea here is to reduce rent, reduce energy, and then understand when our building is used, so that when our staff aren't using our buildings, the natural patterns of our building, if we then can rent this out on these new kind of Airbnb type websites, then this could generate some income. We also aim to optimize BMS scheduling, so this is building management systems. So if the building is open till 10 p.m. And all the energy systems are on, then the question is, if everyone goes home consistently at 7 p.m., why do we have all the energy systems on? Yes, we need to provide the ability for the systems to be turned on and off if somebody wants to work late till 10 p.m. But if it's very rare that somebody works late, then surely it makes sense to turn things off earlier than when the building closes. So we're really seeing from utilization data that there's value at looking at this a bit deeper. How do we provide a control system so that maybe if we have 4 floors and maybe once a month, one person on one floor wants to work late, how do we enable that to happen, but by being energy efficient as well? We also want to turn off devices, so these are then not just the big systems like ventilation. The BMS controls ventilation and lighting and heating and cooling. What about the smaller things like laptops and things plugged in? So this again is something that we'd like to turn off. As people go home, then maybe we should turn off these devices. And then as a researcher in a university who also works for the government from time to time on projects, we want to encourage energy efficiency to all buildings. So we want to be able to compare energy efficiency in a fair way, and for us a fair way means a way that doesn't punish the buildings that are using their space efficiently. In fact, we want to kind of promote and encourage these spaces. So with our new metric that I mentioned, we think we can help stop having these buildings being punished. So when we talk energy efficiency, a building that has lots of people in it and is using its space in a really good way, that they would do well in an energy efficiency kind of competition and from a point of view, and which is the opposite of what's happening today. We want to flip today's rules on their head, and to do this we will use space efficiency data and occupancy and utilization data. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to Axis and Cognumatics for helping us with our research. Thank you.